Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. I have Yakov Smart on today. He's considered to be a leading expert when it comes to attracting high net worth investors and raising capital online. So if you're raising capital for deals out there, you're going to want to listen up. He's the founder of the Investor Attraction Academy, author of Disrupting LinkedIn, and the host of the Capital Raising Podcast Show. Yakov is sought after authority by capital raisers across the U.S. and Canada. To date, his innovative strategies and systems have literally resulted in tens of millions of private capital raised to fund real estate deals. Yakov, welcome to the show, man. It's great to see you.
Hey, great to be here, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
Hey, pleasure's all mine. For those in the audience that are not familiar with you, why don't you give us a little context and backstory of how you got to what you're doing today?
Yeah, so to make a long story short, I got into the online space. I was fascinated by online marketing back in 2014, 2015, so a while ago. And I started learning everything I could. My first online product, people are going to laugh, it was actually an ebook on how to succeed in college. So I wrote that, published it on Amazon, promoted that, sold a few copies, but more importantly, started to develop a skill set. And that led me to starting a consulting business, showing people how to use LinkedIn to go out there, generate leads, find clients, put themselves out there. And that really evolved into something where I was going around the country doing these in-person workshops, doing these one-day seminars. And then guess what? 2020 happened and COVID hit. We all remember where we were when that happened. It was a very disruptive time. So for me, almost serendipitously, I found an opportunity to work with real estate syndicators and capital raisers. We had people starting to reach out. They were curious about using LinkedIn to find investors. So we kind of connected the dots, put it two and two together, started off with an online course, and then developed into what we're currently doing, which is showing people how to tap into LinkedIn and other channels specifically to go out there and find investors, build relationships so they can go out there and raise more capital. So we've been very fortunate. It's been quite a journey. I like to say we're just getting started. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here and to share some of these strategies, these paradigm shifts with your audience, because I think there's a lot of untapped potential out there when it comes to not only marketing, right, but also specifically building trust and credibility online, right, with potential investors.
Yeah, I'm excited to jump into the strategy here. So you work with people, sponsors, operators that want to raise capital for real estate deals, and you teach a very nuanced method for doing that. How did you get into this, though? I mean, did you have a background in raising capital? Because you went from, doing like the, helping people get jobs in the workshops, and then COVID came and kind of, just truncated your business that as it did a lot of industries. How did you get into this specific niche?
Yeah. So lead generation, when it comes to, because I was working with a lot of people who had high ticket services, right? So we were teaching people how to use LinkedIn to sell high ticket services, generate the lead, build trust, set an appointment, make the sale, all that kind of stuff, right? And it just so happens that raising capital is pretty much identical. It's just a different product, right? It's
I
just a
see.
little bit of nuance. Like, you got a deal, you're raising capital. There's a little more buildup, typically, a little bit of a different ask. But the marketing systems and strategies that we were using translated really well to this space. And then over the years, we've refined them to where they're super specific, right? Okay, what questions do investors have? What's the best way to grab attention? These types of things. So a lot of it is psychology based and understanding the process. And I'm really big on being able to reverse engineer something, right? To be like, say, okay, where's this person starting from? What are the steps? What's the journey that they need to take to go from, hey, I'm someone who's a busy professional online to, hey, I've heard of Brandon, I'm interested. Now let me wire some money, write him a check, and trust him enough to do that, right? So there's a lot of nuances there. The system originally came from some of the things that were working for me because I started off in this space, started my business. I was really, really young, and I didn't really have a background in marketing. I mean, I got a degree in public relations for what that's worth, and not worth a whole lot, right? Not something that I don't think I've ever used. It was just like a piece of paper, right? So for me, when I first started marketing myself, I had to figure out, how do I get people to, first of all, see me as having some expertise, and also to get people to say, you know what, I want to work with this guy. I want to invest to work with him, right? So a lot of that translated very nicely into the capital raising space. And then personally, at this point, I've generated over 10,000 leads online. And these were people who originally didn't have any idea who I was. And it's like, oh, this dude out there talking about marketing. And now in the capital raising space, this dude out there talking about finding investors. So it's been a really cool transformation.
Well, I honestly think that you teach probably one of the most valuable skills out there. And, you teach leverage. Raising capital is probably one of the highest forms of leverage. Hiring other people, other labor, that's one form of leverage, media, software. But the capital piece, I mean, this is huge, right? This is kind of the chokehold in a lot of businesses. You can't survive without the capital piece. In real estate eats a lot of it, man. I mean, we're in the real estate business and it takes a lot of money. So walk us through the psychology. We live in a world where people just get inundated with ads. Some people say that we see thousands of different ads a day. And so the key is really to break through that attention, hook, grab, and then ultimately get somebody to wire money to somebody. Mm-hmm. So what does that start to finish process look like with your system to get somebody from, I don't know you, to here's $100,000? Because that's pretty incredible. And then you have to teach it to somebody else on how to do it, which you've done. I've seen your website. I've seen the testimonials. I know people in some of the mastermind groups I've went that use your system, that say it's great. So walk us through that.
Yeah, so it's something that if you've never done it and you're listening, you might say, I don't know if that's even possible, man. You're like, I have to go to a networking event and schmooze locally, and how am I going to raise other than friends and family? And the truth is, it's very possible, right? And it starts with getting someone's curiosity. That's always the starting point, right? Getting someone's attention, then getting their curiosity. So we have to think about it this way, where a lot of people mess this up is they think they're going to have a great deal and then they're going to cold pitch it to strangers and they're going to be eager to invest. And that's not quite how it works, as I'm sure you've experienced, Brandon. So it starts with identifying, okay, who are we talking to? Who are we reaching with our message? And every platform has its nuances. Let's take LinkedIn, for example. You can go and you can build a targeted list. Ideally, you want people to have something in common with you, right? So let's say, you're based out in Tennessee, right? So instant commonality, you're in Tennessee, they're in Tennessee. That's like an instant thing that you can't fake that, right? That's a very human to human commonality. Some other examples people have worked with us have used if they've been in the military, right? Targeting those branches. Like, we've had Marine officers, Navy, Army, that type of thing. People who have worked at large corporations, people who have had similar types of roles, people who are in similar interest and affinity groups, right? So we refer to these things as angles, right? So it's really important to be talking to the right person, whether you're posting DMs, running ads. That alone is half the battle. If you're talking to the wrong person, you're going to trigger people and you're going to waste a bunch of time, right? So it's really important to get specific. Who are we reaching? Depending on the platform, we have more control on some platforms than others, right? So if you're running, for example, paid traffic on like a Facebook or a YouTube, you leave a lot to that algorithm, right? They've got this artificial intelligence kind of determines who your stuff's getting in front of, versus like a LinkedIn direct message, or if you're sending a DM on Facebook, you literally control who gets the message. And that's really, really powerful. So step one, who are we talking to? Step two, how are we going to get their attention and curiosity, right? So there's a number of angles. They're actually similar angles, whether you're running paid traffic, posting, sending DMs. The angles are quite similar, right? So I'll list out a few. These are things that get people to say, you know what, I'm interested in learning more about this. I'm curious to find out more information, because that's the first investment. The very first thing someone has to do is invest their attention, right? If they're not investing attention, how are they going to wire you $100,000? It ain't going to happen, right? So some of these angles: saving on taxes, adding passive income, hedging against inflation, some of these angles, building equity. There's also the pride, and this might sound funny to some people, but there's a little bit of the pride that comes with telling your buddies, hey, I'm invested in real estate, right? You know what? I'm invested in real estate. I'm not doing anything. They're sending me a check every month. That's juicy, right? Who doesn't want to be in real estate who's not in real estate? So we have to think about, okay, what's going to be the hook? What's going to get someone to say, okay, I'm interested, get them to lean in, want to either request more information through an opt-in, or, with direct messaging, we see people doing an intro call, right? So if you're doing outbound, which is you're sending a direct message, this could be in the form of prospecting email, that type of thing. The process, if you will, is going from first message, maybe a little bit of back and forth, depending on the audience. There's usually some FAQs, if when scenarios, that type of thing. And then setting up what's called an intro call, 10, 15-minute call, just to touch base, connect, because the connection becomes so much more powerful once you take things offline, right? Because when you're offline, you're talking, you ideally do it over Zoom, you see someone, you find out if there's a potential fit, you find out if there's rapport, you figure out what is it that interests them particularly. And then from there, the second call, you dive a little bit deeper, talk about deal examples. Ideally, they get some educational content in between the calls, and then usually by call 2, or sometimes we have people doing 3 calls just to like present the offer on a 3rd call. That person is then what we call deal ready, right? So there's enough trust, there's enough attention, there's enough rapport. You ideally know whether or not they're accredited, how much capital they have to place. If they've got money sitting in a 401k, you can help them with the self-directed IRA process, all these different nuances that make the sales process easier. So that's the outbound side, right? The inbound side, very similar. People might have heard this before. We have a little bit of a different twist on it, but it's similar enough to go through. Let's say someone sees an ad, right? That ad drives them into what's called a funnel. There's something called a landing page. That person then opts in. Ideally, and there's a number of things you could drive them to. It could be an ebook, PDF, all these different things. The term in the industry is the lead magnet. I'm big on webinars personally, because I think if someone hears you talking and sees you as an expert, it could take 15, 20, 25 minutes. That person has a higher likelihood when they come to the call with you coming pre-sold, right? So it's really, really important, especially if you're doing your own investor relations, if you haven't scaled that piece yet, right? And so from there, similar process. Ideally, you have that 2-step close. And then, of course, on the back end, email marketing and all those different types of things.
So you said a lot there. You've got 2 strategies. You got the outbound where you're actively doing ads. And then the first one I'd call kind of similar to inbound or spear fishing. Hey, I know what fish I'm hunting. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it's a fish that I've got something in common with, I can relate to. You're building a targeted list. And then there is either some kind of automated outreach or some kind of identification on, all right, hey, here's what they're interested in. And so when you're reaching out, you're trying to do it in a different, unique way. That's step one. And that's probably, in my opinion, where I think the hardest part is, because you've got to get them interested. Like you said, you got to get them curious. And then from there, you set up a call or, discuss, kind of what you got going, get them interested. You have a conversation and that can lead to, potentially investing. So I'll hang on to that for a second. What do you see successful people doing when they reach out to people to grab their attention and create curiosity? Because I get probably 4 or 5 of these bots a day that reach out and, hey, it's great to meet you. Saw we're both in this thing. Glad to connect. And then it's another message, and it's just these automated bots, and it's kind of lifeless, and there's no you can just tell it's a bot, right? And you're inundated. So and I'll share kind of what's been successful for me, but I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what have you seen be successful in these outreach programs?
Yeah, so a couple things with that before we get into that. So different audiences respond to different things, right? So if you're targeting, for example, people in academia, your tone's going to be a little bit different, right? They're getting different types of messages. They're going to respond to different things. If you're targeting CEOs, it's going to be a little bit different. If you're targeting corporate executives, slightly different. And you can kind of see if they're saturated or not. Some people are less saturated, some people are more saturated with messages. Mm-hmm. The next thing is the outbound stuff is usually the lowest hanging fruit, right? What does that mean? So if someone's just starting out capital raising or finding investors, what are a few things they can do, right? They can go and they create content. Typically a long-term play doesn't work exceptionally well, but it works as it compounds over time. It's just like doing a podcast like this one. They can go on other people's platforms, other people's podcasts. That can be very effective as well. The outbound piece, you could literally, if you kind of know what you're doing, listen to this right now, and then tomorrow have messages going out and be starting conversations, right? I want people listening to that to think about how powerful that can be right now, because it is the lowest hanging fruit. It can be saturated. It can be stuffy, spammy, all those different things. So what are the levers we can pull to avoid that? Number one, you definitely want to have reach, right? You want to reach people in volume, one to many. If you're sending 5 messages a day, unless they're super personalized, even then, right, you've got a lot of variance there. I would make sure that you're reaching people at scale, right? That each and every day you've got new conversations started. Second thing, to make the message less, what's the word, spammy, or, to make it seem less robotic, it needs to seem personalized, right? So you fill in the person's name. Ideally, you start with a commonality, right? That's a real commonality. Hey, Brandon, we both live out here in Tennessee, and we're both part of Raise Masters, right? If someone sends you a message like that, you're like, okay, what do they have to say, right? They've got your curiosity. Even if you're not interested in what they're offering, you're like, okay, I'm going to, I'm listening. I'm going to read this message, right? So ideally, you have 2 commonalities, and then you need a hook, right? So the hook, And there's three directions people take this, right? So one direction is being more direct, which I actually like on LinkedIn, right? Because there's a lot of noise, people appreciate a little bit of directness. So saying, hey, I'm looking to connect with this type of person who's interested in this and this, and like, high level benefits, some of the things that we talked about earlier. And then saying, hey, let me know if you'd be open to exploring this over a call, and also having a little PS in there to make sure that they know there's not going to be a pitch, no like funny business, right? So that disarms people a little bit. So that's one approach. Another approach is same kind of hook, but instead of making an offer to a call, just like, real quick, this is what it is. I'm looking to connect with people who'd be interested in this and this. Okay, to send more info, right? They say, yeah, sure. Now you can send the link to your webinar. You've got an ebook guide. Now they've raised their hand and said, okay, I'm interested in this. It's a little bit of a slower play, but you've cut through the noise where they say, okay, yeah, like give me more info. Like, what's this about, right? Mm-hmm. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes people say, you know what, Brandon, I've actually been looking for something like this, right? Is that really a thing? Because most people, I don't know if you've experienced this, but most people don't know what a syndication is. Yeah. Most people don't really know what passive investing is. And they can be some high net worth individuals. They just don't know it exists. It's the craziest thing, right? Blows people's mind. And then the third way, well, there's a fourth way too, which I'll mention, but the third way is a little bit more of a conversational approach, commonality, and then a hook. We used to call it magic questions, right? So, hey, what kind of things have you invested in, or have you ever done this type of thing, right? So there's ways to frame that. I'm not a huge fan of it personally, especially on LinkedIn. Facebook is a little bit different, right? Especially if we're targeting by like Facebook groups, but with LinkedIn, I like more of that direct approach, just kind of cuts through the noise. If it's specific, if it's relevant to people, there's people who will say, okay, yeah, worth a 10, 15-minute call. Like, let's go. And then the fourth way, of course, is just using that messaging to offer up your lead magnet, offer up a freebie. Like, hey, we've got this ebook and we've got this webinar, want a copy, right? And then for their email, they get on your list. It's tough to do volume that way. It certainly works for building a list, but you just don't know how sticky the lead is, right? And so if you're starting out and you want to build upward momentum, I'd really focus on booking calls as like that initial metric on the outbound side.
Okay, I was curious if you're pushing them more towards a lead magnet to indoctrinate them and get them on your list, or if you're going direct to the call, which can be a little bit more. There's a little bit more oomph to get over in order to get them on that call. So you're that's what's worked really well for us. I don't know if you do anything with Loom videos, but my VA will set up, if we're doing whatever, a name, email, whatever, and I'll just go through the list, and I've got a pre-recorded message, and I'll put the name at the front, right, and I'll go through. And so I'm like, hey, Yakov, I love what you're doing. Saw this. I usually try to do a little bit of homework on them and make it very personalized. So when they get this Loom video in their inbox, it's like you can actually see the first few seconds of the video, and it's usually me waving, and it's got the title like, hey, name, hey, Brandon, hey, Yakov. That's what's worked really well for us anyway, doing that targeted approach. But again, it does take time to be able to crank out those individual videos. So are you pushing more towards the personalized stuff, or are you thinking like a more general approach to people that you've targeted, where your message can be like, hey, I'm just going to target people in Tennessee or in medical device sales, and that's what my video says, so that there's some level of personalization to it?
Yeah, it's a little bit more general. I haven't seen specifically on the LinkedIn side, I haven't seen like the Loom videos be that effective specifically. I've seen it be effective via email. Like, I think, when we connected on this, I got one of those videos. I watched it, and the first thing that came to my mind, I was like, okay, are they editing in that like first name piece, and then it's a generic video? I was like, he's a smart guy. They have to be, right? Or maybe not, right? But it's a cool approach. It still felt personalized. I appreciated the effort. So it just depends, right? I think if people want it to be rinse and repeat, I say keep it a little bit more general. You'll probably get less of a response rate, but that's okay. There's thousands of people, right? Mm-hmm. And the volume makes up for it. And if you've got a strong enough commonality, people start paying attention. They're like, okay, what's this about, right? What you don't want to do is give too much in the message. If you start, spewing paragraphs about passive investing and your deals and your track record and your story, that's premature storytelling, right? We don't want to do that stuff. So the message is just enough to get someone's attention. And you mentioned a good point too. It does take a little bit more compliance, if you will, to get someone to say, yeah, let's book a call, right? But you know what? The people that are interested, even if they're not like, oh, hey, let's talk right now, they'll come back with a question. Hey, that's interesting. And then what kind of deals do you do? Or, hey, how long have you been doing this? Hey, that's interesting. Before we talk, do you have a website? Right. And so sometimes we teach people too, if there's not initial response, there's a follow-up message that goes out. The follow-up message doesn't have content, but it's like, hey, let's acknowledge you interested, like just very informal, right? And then at that point, it's like, hey, by the way, if you want to learn more about this, here's a resource, right? But I think you kind of let people pick their own adventure in that standpoint.
Okay. All right. So they get to decide how big of a net and how direct and personalized they want to make it. Let's talk about automation here, right? Because it sounds like this is a good bit of work. It sounds like you can automate the net, right? But then you've got all these responses that are coming in. So now you've got something to manage. Are you finding that this is a good system for owner operators to go in and do, or is this something that you can plug in, like a VA from the US or the Philippines? What recommendations do you have around automating this process?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what we do, because the automation is, I'll say it this way. I think it's more prolific than a lot of people would expect, right? It's very much, it can fill in information. It kind of runs on its own. It doesn't look automated when you frame the message the right way. And it's very much rinse and repeat, where all you're having to do is refill the campaigns, right? So my recommendation, this is when people work with us, this is what we do. We set up the automations for them, right? Because that can be a lot of legwork and there's a lot of nuances there, list building, all that kind of stuff. And then ideally, where you want to get to with the automation is all you're doing is you're checking the inbox and you're responding to leads. That's all you need to be focused on, right? Even the follow-up is automated. So that's a really key thing, especially like on the lead generation types of automations. And what we do internally, and what most of our members do too, is they have a virtual assistant who will go in, and sometimes there's if-when responses. Sometimes it's as simple as sending someone a calendar link. So a virtual assistant will do that, right? So, but either way, the legwork required is maybe 15, 20 minutes a day, maybe, right, by a VA. And the automation does most of the grunt work for you.
So it sounds like it's automated up to the point where you're checking your inbox, and you said the follow-up is automated. How is that possible?
It's AI based. I'm not sure how it's possible. Actually, I'm not. I didn't build the software, but it just knows, like, after 48 hours, if there's no response, to follow up. It's kind of awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about this, and then I want to give the audience a way to reach out to you and learn more about your system. What are some of the big hurdles that you would say someone who's raising capital for a real estate deal needs to overcome with their audience or with their leads for them to actually write a check and give them money?
It's a great question. So I think the very first thing comes down to trust, right? Of course, if you don't trust someone, you're not going to write them a check for 100,000, right? The next thing is for people to like start seeing themselves as an investor, and even understanding that it's possible, right? We talked about this earlier. A lot of people think that investing is just, you putting your money in the stock market, or you talking with your financial advisors. So that initial piece of education, I call it like the red pill approach. They need to understand, hey, I get to have some control over my investing. Yes, passive income is a real thing. Yes, it's possible to even save on taxes, right? Yes, it's possible to build equity, and like there's recession resistant deals. So everyone's a little bit different, but those are the main things, right? So having the paradigm shift, like, hey, I can actually be an investor. I can get into real estate, for example, hands off. I don't need to be a landlord and deal with tenants, toilets, trash. That's a big paradigm shift. And then for them to see, like, how does the deal work? What's the person's track record? And then the proof of concept, the biggest proof of concept is they invest the first time and they get their first check, right? That's a really, really big deal for people, because I think, Brandon, in your experience, and a lot of people that we work with, they're shooting for repeat investors, right? So you can have someone who literally has 750,000 sitting in a savings account, and they'll start off at 50K or 100K because they want to make sure that it's legit. And then you have your next deal, they'll go and they'll reinvest a couple 100,000, right? So
Yep.
Those are a couple of the big things. But I think more than anything else, it's solving the too good to be true factor, right? Where, if someone doesn't know any better, they're like, no way, I don't do any of the work. I get paid a check. It's safer than the stock market. Like, what's the catch here? Is it's a Ponzi scheme, right? So
Yeah.
my recommendation, rather than letting people work through those objections themselves, like in your content, or even when you talk to those people, bring them up proactively, address those, and then lead people through that paradigm shift, right? Because all those objections, all that resistance, it's just a limitation on what people know. They don't know what they don't know. So that's the biggest thing, the trust and the knowledge gap. And then, of course, they have to like the deal, right? And I think, like with economic climate, sometimes people get stigma like, oh, I'm just going to hold on to cash, or, in this economy. And it's, again, educating people through that, because I think you can make the point that most of the time, most people who have really invested and really cashed in throughout history, a lot of the times it's been in the down economies, it's been in the recessions, right? So that type of thing is really powerful. So I think, to answer your question, trust, education, continuing to reinforce things, and continuing to show up, right? That's why I'm really big on email marketing. So someone gets on your list and they only hear from you once a quarter versus they're hearing from you once a week. That's a big deal, right? So developing, like, and I think, Brandon, you do a great job of this almost omnipresence effect. The more touch points, the easier it is to instill that trust and instill that belief. And then once someone goes from being a green investor to now they've invested as a passive investor at least once, right? I think now they see what's possible. They start referring people. They start getting excited. They're seeing the money. A lot of good things start to happen from there.
Yeah, you got to hit every part of the funnel, especially staying top of mind, because when people find you, it's very rare that they immediately invest. It's staying top of mind. And how do you do that? Email marketing, social media, right? The more touch points you have. So when they are finally ready, they're thinking of you and not somebody else. I love it. If people want to learn more about you, Yakov, learn more about your system or your podcast, where should they go?
Yeah, super easy. If you go to findmoreinvestors.com/training, you can watch one of our webinars. Kind of gives you a little more of a demo into the outbound system and how people work with us. So that's findmoreinvestors.com/training. And if they Google my name, it's pretty easy to find. I also host the Raising Capital show, which I know, Brandon, you're going to be a guest on in the very near future as well.
Awesome, man. We'll make sure that those links get posted. Yakov, it's been a pleasure having you on, man, and great talking with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.